So in the film Megamind, there is a character named Minion. He's the member of a sentient fish-like species given to our protagonist by his parents to protect him throughout his life, shortly before his home planet is destroyed. We, as the audience, are largely kept in the dark as to what this now dead alien society is like. So when Megamind's parents define Minion's name and purpose, we presume they mean our understanding of those terms, but there isn't any basis for this analysis. We know nothing of their culture or their language, so the dynamic between Megamind and Minion is defined in essence by the societal definition of what a minion is. Minion's label is a servant, so he is a servant because of this label. Minion is then fired for insubordination because he dares to question what the person in power is doing. Minion decides to help Megamind in the climax of the film insofar that there is recognition of his true value and given the proper respect he rightfully deserves. As a servant, Minion does not get the same amount of credit as Megamind despite doing much of the work needed to keep the evil lair in order. So him demanding some form of praise is in essence an arc, but he refers to Megamind still as Sir?
We won today, didn't we, sir?
So has the dynamic between the two characters changed, or was there ever a need to change anything in the first place? Is the movie trying to tell me anything, or am I just the moron?
¿Por qué no los dos?
Well, let's get into that. Part 1. Shrek is back again.
Somebody once told me the world is gonna roll me. I ain't the sharpest tool in the shed.
I liked Shrek. I mention that because if you watch A Certain Someone, then you know of a solid hypothesis where every DreamWorks film released in the decade after Shrek was trying to be like Shrek in some capacity, tackling a question of essentialism. This time the inquiry is thus: what is a superhero or a supervillain? How does society create these roles? How do these labels define the people involved? And how does this affect our institutions? Megamind begins this task by punishing our main character, having the dream life stolen from him, and instead dooming him to grow up in a prison. This beginning is important. Megamind didn't choose the life of a criminal. He never had the ability to be taught a different moral code. His circumstances led to him using his vast intelligence in a prison escape and then getting charged with more time in prison. How one applies their talents initially has a lot to do with what environment they are born. It doesn't help that Megamind came from a less privileged planet with less durable shuttle technology, vulnerable enough for him to be born in a prison in the first place. But then we come to the schoolhouse, where despite Megamind's attempts to integrate into society, he is inevitably rejected because of his strange appearance, unfortunate accidents leading to punishment, and coming from an underprivileged background. This rejection reaches the definition of bullying, where in his self-defense, Megamind is once again punished. All the while, the bullying is propagated by the guy who stole his life. Megamind finally decides after all this abuse to accept the role society has given him, as a villain. And this is where the movie comes to its first conclusion. Society creates villains. According to Megamind, what is the essence of a villain? People who don't easily integrate into society, make mistakes, and respond accordingly, only to be further rejected. When everything is stacked against you, why shouldn't one embrace the label and reap all the benefits of villainy? A sentiment very much like Shrek's, except unlike Shrek, who uses the villain label to live a life of relative comfort and solitude, Megamind uses the label to live out juvenile revenge schemes. Shrek is an isolated entity that is provoked by society. Megamind is a delinquent that irritates a seemingly functioning world. Like I said before, every animated film is Shrek. But the idea that Megamind is marginalized for being different is the most common motif found in the movie. Not only is he blue with an obnoxiously large head, he pronounces common language incorrectly, acts very juvenile with a high degree of flamboyancy. In comparison, Minion appears more in tune with the general cultural zeitgeist, and one could argue more normal. But then that begs the question, what is normal? Let's use this example. After about 30 minutes into the film, we meet the character Bernard, a witty intellectual who is as equally obsessed with discovery as Roxanne Ritchie, a reporter whose motive is to discover what our protagonist is plotting. Through their shared interests and increasing attraction, both characters start dating, leading to the character Hal becoming disillusioned with women and society. But here's the catch. Spoiler alert for a 9-year-old children's film. Bernard is Megamind. But before this discovery, there is a conversation about what constitutes the judgment of another person, followed by the affirmation of normalcy as a virtue. Normalcy in Megamind is defined by how involved one is with the hero-villain paradigm, but normalcy is not purely association. With that term comes an implied morality. Heroes are good and villains are bad. Normal is somewhere in between. But Megamind aims to criticize this view using the totally not Superman guys we swear himself, Metro Man, and the criminal justice system by association.
I love you, Metro Man.
And I love you, random citizen.
Part 2. Frick the Police. Trying not to swear I'm sorry. Police, and subsequently authority in general, are presented in a very cynical light in Megamind. An institution full of inept, weak people whose purpose is largely to look after the criminals Metro Man throws in prison. So when Megamind finally usurps the most powerful man in the world, they lay down their guns and allow this villain to topple the government and install a dictatorship. Amongst all this, the police are shown to have a quite callous attitude towards the inmates. There doesn't appear to be any attempt at rehabilitation. The purpose of the Metro City Correction Facility seems to be the holding of criminals to keep them out of the public space. Whether or not the inmates are able to reintegrate into society matters little to the police, for if they get out, Metro Man will pick them up and bring them back. At this point, the prison exists purely because people think it should exist, and it exerts the will of the elite being Metro Man, who doesn't kill. Speaking of the certain protector of metrocity, one can succinctly say, despite his hero mantle, Metro Man is not a good person. He is presented throughout the beginning as an individual driven by ego. And while to some extent he genuinely cares about the city, in reality he only cares about how much the current activity he is participating in is able to make him feel appreciated. It isn't just a coincidence that he gives up being a hero to become a musician. Need I remind you, allowing the government to be overthrown by an autocrat. Metro Man is what you would define as old money, someone born into affluence, thrived under privileged conditions, and continuously succeeded at the game of life because of such. Unlike Superman, whose small-town upbringing provided the moral foundations necessary to become the Man of Steel. Clark Kent, who purposefully adorns the persona explicitly to protect the people he knows, and because he really doesn't enjoy being in the spotlight to that extent, stands in direct contrast to Metro Man, whose entire identity revolves around being a superhero. Why develop an alter ego when you can just soak up all the fame and money that comes with hero work? Protecting the city is merely continuing his childish feud, putting down again and again the weird guy who has the audacity to be angry about his current situation. Metro Man acts very juvenile at the beginning of the film, which coincides with his admittance that his lifelong feud with Megamind has prevented him from growing as a person. And Metro Man is old, his hair is beginning to gray, and very clearly he isn't someone you would want protecting your city. The man exists to serve two overarching themes of Megamind. 1. The criminal justice system, in its current incarnation, exists to satisfy the ego whilst validating their moral superiority. And 2. Our actions are not guided by our perceived predetermined roles. Because one's morality is relative, judge accordingly by the choices you make. Speaking of which, Part 3. Existence precedes essence.
Good luck, fellas!
We're gonna die!
Megamind at the end of the film combines his newfound herodom with his villain aesthetic. This choice was decided because through his relationship with Roxanne, he realized humanity was a species worth saving. By the final sequence in the montage, in which we see the relationship between Bernard and Roxanne made explicit, we see society beginning to function normally, exemplified by the children playing in the background. So there is an understanding by Megamind what civilian life feels like for most people. So, through self-reflection and confrontation with Minion, Megamind comes to the realization that he no longer wants to be a villain. Which plays into the ultimate theme of Megamind. You have the ability to choose who you want to be, and to pretend you never did is disingenuous. Roxanne makes this explicit by noting that a person is judged based upon their actions. In fact, the entire catalyst for the story is Metro Man coming to the realization that the only real thing obligating him to superhero-dom was himself. Then we come to the one aspect of the film that really drives this point home: Titan. Hal Stewart adopted the role as the new hero of Metro City because he had the inclination that the role of the superhero came with the ability to court women. Of course, as revealed, this was merely the perception that society gave him. So when Hal finally decides to go claim his reward for completing Act 1 of his hero origin story, he becomes disillusioned to the reality that there never was an inherent reward for herodom, only the job that comes with it. In response, Hal decides instead to steal, ultimately rejecting the vast talent given to him. Hal Stewart is very clearly a heavily isolated individual who lives on his own and seemingly has no friends. The only two things that occupy his time are video games and his job, where he finds his only source of communication. So when one of those two things betray him, well, why even bother putting in effort and trying his best when he isn't seemingly going to get any of the things he wants? So instead, he decides to treat life as a video game, the only consistent thing he has, which becomes ever the more true when his space dad turns out to be a complete farce. It is no surprise that when given the chance, Titan decides to kill the individual who has actively manipulated him and stolen the woman he is obsessed with. The important bit to note is obsessed, because with his powers, if he became a hero, then he easily probably could have gotten at least a date with any girl. But because those girls aren't Roxanne, seemingly the one redeeming thing about this world, he decides to reject society. Hal is a case study as to what happens to someone when society looks at them with apathy. While there are probably institutions that encouraged Hal to do his best and attain good grades, ultimately one begins to develop an attitude on whether or not they can realistically achieve those goals. Most decide early on that they are not smart or intellectual, and should strive to get by the best they can. I could very easily see this be the case for the antagonist of the story. Ultimately, Titan decides to adopt a nihilistic philosophy. If nothing matters, if ultimately these institutions that govern our society are a sham, and the relationships that allow the society to function are a waste of time, then why bother trying to save it? The movie doesn't make judgments on whether or not this attitude is entitled, but it does portray Titan's descent into villainy as a poor series of choices that waste a heap of potential. And that's pretty much it. Except there is one last thing I think should be mentioned before we close out this video. Part 4. Muddy Messages.
I have eyes that can see right through lead.
Horrible!
Megamind as a film is ultimately about becoming a good person regardless of what society has done to you. And by doing such, being able to change society because people respect and trust you. Isn't it? Well, it would be, but there is more confusion than what I have described here. For example, the structures that created the society are still in place. Maybe Megamind will fund education programs for criminals, but the film never mentions anything like that. So will Metro City stay the same except with Megamind in Metro Man's place? That still leaves a weak police force with a high prison population, allowing for more Megaminds to be creative. Society hasn't necessarily improved all that much, merely the one enforcing the law of society has changed. The structures of power are still the same. And what is even the risk of Titan becoming the dictator of Metro City? Of course, we do not want Roxanne to die, but the city was already degenerating under Megamind. The only real difference is whereas Megamind would lead like a buffoon, Titan would control like a bully and kill random people? If innocent people weren't already dying under Megamind's regime, of course. And the film gives off this impression that if conditions were just slightly different, then Megamind or Titan wouldn't have become villains. But isn't that concept deterministic? That you are largely a product of your environment and your upbringing? Doesn't that destroy the whole message of the movie? That would depend on whether or not Megamind believes wholeheartedly in free will, which it doesn't. Megamind merely claims that you can change the person you are now regardless of the past. Very much like the Netflix series BoJack Horseman, where yes, BoJack has had a rough childhood, but that doesn't mean he can't be a good person or he has an excuse to do bad things. Megamind is optimistic, but I think that is something we need to be, or else we would be Titan. And let's be real, nobody wants to look like that. Hi there, I'm the guy who made this video. If you have any thoughts about what I've said here in this video, then be sure to leave a comment down below and share the video around to continue the conversation. If you would like to keep up to date as to when I'm going to be making more videos like this, then follow me on Twitter or subscribe and hit that bell notification down below. If you enjoy content like this, then head to my Patreon, for I will be using that money to invest in this channel. Speaking of which, one of those investments, thank you to Geeky Steven for editing this video, and again, you will find his channel in the description, as well a shout out to Big Joel for the inspiration for this video series. I will definitely be making more of these, it just depends on when exactly I'm going to be able to get around to it, though I hope it will be very soon, because this was definitely very, very fun. Regardless, thank you guys for watching, and take care.